All right, welcome back. This chapter is on leases. I'm well aware that some of you probably got into the real estate course with the intention of being an investor. You want to enter the real estate realm for the purposes of making a profit off of properties that you allow other people to live in and pay you money for. And that's great. A lot of people do that. There's lots of investors that actually get their real estate licenses just to have access to those types of opportunity. So maybe you are getting in the real estate business because you've never owned your first house and you're a renter or a tenant yourself. Nothing at all wrong with that either. But we are going to dive a little bit deeper this session on different rules regarding landlord-tenant relationships, which we'll do more in property management later. But we're going to start introducing some of the types of leases and the individual concepts that are more specifically related to leasehold properties and not so much the ownership and different types of ownership. So let's get started. The first thing that we're going to look at, of course, is the concept of having a lease contract. We're going to deal much more with contracts later also, but know that if it's not in writing in real estate, that is the basis of everything. We say if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist, especially in contract law. We're going to learn more about contracts and exactly how they're made up, but you have to know that whenever you're leasing a property, renting them out, the basis of that relationship between landlord, tenant, property manager, and owner all bases around your lease contract. So if your deed was a verb that puts ownership transfer into action, your lease is also a verb because it is a conveyance instrument of some of those sticks in that bundle that we talked about from the property owner to the leasehold owner. So whenever I'm renting a property, go back to those sticks in the bundle. What all am I giving you the ability to do? Which sticks in the bundle are you getting? You're getting the right to possess. You're getting that stick. You're getting the right to use. You're getting that stick. Can you sell the property? You didn't get that stick. You don't own it. You only have certain rights to it. So when we get into leases and leaseholds, it's important to know for different types of leases exactly what your boundaries are as far as your level of interest and rights in the property. We're going to talk about how sometimes even if you are the main tenant, you could even sublet or assign some of those rights out to other people. So remember, this one we're talking about rights and interest in properties that are leasehold estates, or what they call less than freehold, where we're transferring occupancy and use but not still transferring ownership. So your first section talks about leasehold rights and obligations. Deeper dive into exactly what the tenants are responsible for, exactly what the landlord is responsible for. Definitely very important concepts to remember. And also all of those rights and responsibilities have to be laid out in our contracts. Contract requirements in each state is specific. There are some national rules that the government requires that be included in all leases, but each state would have their own landlord-tenant laws, and we'll start to get into that in this section also. Also, whenever we look at any formal document that we're using in real estate purposes, there's going to be clauses. We'll talk about mortgage clauses, deed clauses, but in leases, there are some specific clauses included in your lease, like the ability to assign parts of those rights to someone else, or the ability to sublet to someone else while you're in that lease. Let's camp out on those two things because there's a little bit of confusion with those two. So I am the tenant. I'm renting a property. Let's say I'm renting this room for the purposes of being here and being able to speak with you guys today. So I'm renting this room. Maybe my agreement says that I am the only person allowed access. I'm the only person that can rent this room out. But what if I decide, well, I don't need the whole other half. You know, if I'm paying $500 to rent this room, I could pay somebody else $250 and they could use the other half. Would I be able to do that? Well, what does your contract say? My lease agreement would have to give me permission to share my rights in this property with someone else. And if my contract does give me permission, I could sublet part of the property. So now, who is responsible for the whole agreement? I am. I signed a document saying I'm going to have to pay the $500. But if I rent out to Greg the other half of the room for $250, he could pay me the $250 that is our agreement. I pay the original owner or landlord the $500 from our contract. Make sense? But what if I say, you know, I don't really need the building for the rest of the time I rented it. Greg, if you'll take the whole thing and take over all of my rights and responsibilities in the lease for the whole $500, could we make that agreement? Well, maybe. If my original contract gave me the right to assign my responsibilities to someone else. So assignment would be when I step out of the way, give all of my rights and responsibilities to someone. Subletting is what they also call a sandwich lease, sandwiched in between. It still filters through the original person with the agreement. But ultimately, just like when you buy a car, have you ever bought a car, get 5 or 6 months down the road and say, wow, I really don't like this thing too much. I wish I would have bought something different. Doesn't mean you can take it back, turn it over and say, never mind, I changed my mind. No. We'll see real quickly what happens if we decide to break those agreements. We signed an agreement for 3 years worth of payments. You got to make those 3 years worth of payments. So the original person signing the contract is always still ultimately bound to it. So even if I did assign my rights to Greg, what happens if he doesn't pay his $500 on time? They can still come back to the original responsible party and make sure that their agreement was followed. And again, different states have different little nuances, so make sure that you're reading over that. But there is a big difference between assignment and subletting, but it also depends on whether the original person in that agreement had the permission to do that in the first place. So you're going to get into different types of leases: gross lease, net lease, percentage lease. There's different reasons for leases, just like there were different reasons for ownership, depending on your purposes. You're going to make sure you want to make some bullet point notes to remember what the different concepts revolving around those different types of leases are. You'll talk in the beginning about how to create a lease, and then you're also going to talk about what terminates those lease or those leasehold interest, and also get into some of the rules and laws nationwide and statewide that govern the landlord-tenant laws and give some protections. So enjoy this chapter on leases, and we'll see you for next session.